Welcome to Plenary 4 of the 8th Africa Regional Platform on Disaster Risk Reduction. This last session for today will be a presentation and discussion of the outcome document of the 8th Africa Regional Platform on Disaster Risk Reduction, namely the PO matrix for 2021 to 2025 and the draft Nairobi Declaration. To moderate this session is Mr. Amjad Abasha, the Chief of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, Regional Office for Africa. Mr. Amjad, the floor is yours.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and special welcomes to Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen who are attending this session. It is the final session of the part of the Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction in Africa, and it's a critical session because we will be discussing or sharing with you and hopefully hearing from you about two issues. First of all, the Program of Action, revised matrix of the African Union Program of Action for implementing the Sendai framework in Africa for the period 2021 to 2025. And this will be presented by my colleague, the technical director, technical DRR coordinator of the African Union, Emmanuel No, Kai Gatkoth will present. And this, after this presentation, we will go to Colonel Charles Awino, the director of the National Disaster Operations Center of the Government of Kenya, and our kind host for this regional platform, where we will go through the key aspects of the draft Nairobi Declaration. We're calling it Nairobi Declaration at this stage, after which it will be presented tomorrow to the high-level ministerial session, and hopefully they will adopt it as is. Before I go to the first speaker to present the PO matrix, I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that you can put your comments based or questions and for the Program of Action matrix on the chat box, and also later on, when we go to the draft Nairobi Declaration, we'll share that on screen with you. You'll see the English version, and we'll provide you a French version on the link that is attached to it. So without further delay, let me go to my first speaker, Kai, who will present the Program of Action matrix, which, by the way, would like to see, which would like to also have endorsed as part of within the context of the declaration to the ministers tomorrow. So let me begin now, so we can familiarize ourselves for those who have not been followed. The Program of Action matrix for 2021-2025. Kai, my friend, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Amjad. Again, I think today we shared a lot of sessions together. Before I start presenting the POA matrix, especially the new matrix, I would like to give a bit of background. The Program of Action for the implementation of Sendai framework in Africa is running from 2015 to 2030, and it is divided into 5 phases. The first phase was 2015 to 2020. And this phase has gone. So the first phase had one matrix. So this matrix is now gone, and then we are now working on the second phase of the POA matrix. So before coming to the new matrix, let me just take you briefly through what was done so far. The disaster risk reduction agenda in African continent came a long way, and it evolved significantly from a reactive response to proactive response to disasters. And this started in 2004 with the Africa Regional Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction. And today, we have the Program of Action for Implementation of Sendai Framework. So taking you through what we have done in the first matrix, we will look into the main achievement from priority 1, which is understanding disaster risk. And just let me warn you, this is just a summary, because if I have to talk about the achievement we have done for the last 5 years, it's a lot, and I think even 1 week will not be enough. But in terms of understanding disaster risk, the first priority, we have witnessed significant improvement in member states, especially in mainstreaming DRR in development plans. And we also have a number of programs that were in place, such as the Building Disaster Resilient to Natural Hazard in Sub-Saharan Africa region, countries and communities. This program made massive gains. We also see a lot of initiatives such as WMO information systems, which now allows national meteorological services to now don't cast the risk every 3 hours. This is a very significant achievement. REX also have implemented a number of information management systems. We have SADC Regional Vulnerability Assessment and Analysis Program and Climate Services Center. And also several regional economic outlook forums are being held across the continent. One of the key area really here is, which was the products of the program Building Disaster Resilient in Sub-Saharan Africa, was the establishment of ICA's Climate Center. This was the first climate center in the region and is one of the key achievements in the past 5 years. We also now established the Africa Science and Technology Advisory Group. This is comprised of 15 scientists. And again, this is a very important landmark achievement for us to ensure that we narrow the gaps between science and implementation. And also a number of early warning systems are in place in member states. There is also a significant increase in DRR in curriculums in all areas, including in tertiary education. In terms of priority 2, we're dealing with disaster risk governance. The African Union has now established the DRR unit in its regular structure. This was a work that took decades of advocacy. And finally, this is paying off. We also have several mechanisms at continental levels that include the Africa Working Group on DRR. We have this regional platform where we are meeting today, and several initiatives that are being made, including the sub-regional platforms and national platforms. Continuing with this risk governance priority, the POA matrix, the first phase, as I told you, was developed, and the implementation was done successfully. We have the first biennial report in place, and then we have the Africa Youth Advisory Board also established, and several structures were put in place. In terms of priority 3, which include disaster risk financing, DRR is now really being reflected in several institutions, including the AUC. And a lot of research and advocacy in DRR financing, policy coherence, CCA implementation is ongoing. And there is significant effort in mobilizing resources to address the implementation of the Sendai framework. There is a lot of more funding also that is going on, but it's sectoral basis, but that also need to be beyond. Also a number of resilient initiatives, including the recent COMESA resilient framework is key instrument that will really attract substantial financing for member states. Continuing with priority number 3, the AUC is also supporting increased participation and investment in mechanisms for risk financing, including through the Africa Risk Capacity. Now, the last priority, we also made a number of achievements. The AUC have supported and coordinated existing disaster intervention on disaster preparedness, response, and humanitarian assistance. Disaster response activities are also supported by Humanitarian Affairs Division within the African Union Department of Political Affairs, which is now part of the new structure under social affairs. And considerable support is ongoing at the REX and national levels. SADC has recently commissioned projects to facilitate the strengthening of regional disaster preparedness and response, institutional and coordination mechanisms. Most member states are supporting existing preparedness and recovery plan. And I think a lot of effort is being made to link this preparedness to early action, which is very encouraging. So in terms of lesson learned, there is really a fair respect for DRR science in terms of understanding risk. National universities and research groups have increasingly included DRR in their curriculum. Regional risk assessment and sub-regional assessment are really doing very well as well. So as I said earlier, Regional Climate Lookout Forum comprised of various actors, including climate scientists, policymakers, is actually the way to go to ensure that we are coordinating better among ourselves. Also, we have seen increase in putting in place multi-hazard early warning systems, although this is likely remaining as a sectoral level, but a lot of work is really ongoing. And in terms of strengthening disaster risk governance, there is really a need for closer cooperation with youth organizations on the continent. There is a need for cooperation as well to ensure that there is better integration of CCA and DRR and ensure funding alignment is addressing that gap. In terms of risk financing, DRR initiatives targeting communities should be an international and important component of broader DRR strategy. And communities have important indigenous knowledge. I think we have been talking of this topic over time. There is a need really to ensure that local solutions are empowered and utilized for decision making. And of course, we know that these communities are endowed with indigenous early warning systems that can ensure safety and minimize loss of damage. In terms of preparedness, there is need for better and sustained partnership in DRR and CCA and sustainable development. REX would need to communicate more and share lessons among themselves because a lot is really ongoing. National budgetary commitments are needed to drive international investment in DRR. A lot of opportunities are there and also challenges. There is still heavy dependency really on external resources. A lot of effort is needed to ensure that. And I think we also need to invest more in technology, research, and domestic financing. We also need to ensure that capacity building is taken as an important priority, including on data collection. Continuing with this is the need for visibility and learning from the work of IAP. In just a span of 1 year, IAP reached over 10,000 youth. I think this is an initiative that we need to build on to ensure that DRR awareness is reaching the last mile. Well, let me just go to the NEO matrix. I was just summarizing what we have done in the last 5 years. Now, the NEO matrix was really undertaken through several initiatives. One was we undertook a qualitative and quantitative research, which was widely conducted on the continent, and a lot of consultation with partners and all agencies were in place. Then, of course, the drafting of the matrix, and now we have the draft. The draft was presented to the Africa Working Group several times. So the new matrix is not really very different. It will build on the 4 priorities. Of course, priority 1, which also corresponds with the POA additional target 1, and priority 2, which also correspond with the POA target 2, and priority 5. So then the same with priority number 4. But let me just go to the content of this new. First of all, we propose a new template which will make it simple to follow, and we are looking at strategic areas, key activities, level of implementation, and lead organizations, result, target, corresponding activities, as well as the time frame. Now, looking at priority 1, there are a number of strategic areas that we have proposed in the new matrix. One of them is risk and vulnerability assessment and analysis, research and innovation, disaster risk losses and damage data system, and interactive knowledge and information sharing mechanisms, and then science-driven disaster risk reduction, inventory and mainstreaming of DRR, and resilience in climate change and other sustainable development agenda, and then the biennial reporting. So those are key areas that we would like to achieve in the next remaining period during this new matrix. In terms of priority 2, we also have a number of the intervention areas. One is looking at coordination, one is looking at gender and inclusion, and the other is looking at transboundary risk management. And of course, the other one is looking at subnational and national DRR strategies. I'm afraid I can't read. There's some change on the window. Can you increase the size of the slide, please? Yeah. All right. Excellent. In terms of priority number 3, we are looking at international and continental regional funding mechanisms. 2, we are looking at domestic funding for DRR and CCA and resilience. And 3rd, we are looking at multi-sectoral domestic financing. In terms of priority number 4, we are looking at preparedness, contingency planning, and then early warning systems, which must be multi-hazard. And we are looking at also issues of dissemination. We're looking at recovery issues and building back better. This is how the new matrix look like. Let me just give you one example on strategic area 1.1, that is risk and vulnerability assessment analysis. The key activities are so many, but one of them is support member states on disaster risk and vulnerability assessment. And the level of implementation is national. But the leading institution here are member states to be supported by REX, AUC, UNDRR, and other agencies. The result here we want to see during this period is that member states have increased technical capacity to sustainably undertake disaster risk and vulnerability assessment. The target here is we want to ensure that certain member states are trained in a risk and vulnerability assessment and a risk analysis capacity. And we all need to ensure that all member states, all the 55 member states are targeted as well through yearly training. So that is just one example of so many activities. It can be a very long document, I can assure you with that, but maybe you will need to have your time to go through it. And another example is on transboundary disaster risk reduction. Key activity here, we are looking at development and implementation of common understanding and approaches to address regional and transboundary disaster risk concerns. And this label is regional and continental. So some of the results we are looking at are annual regional risk reviews, cross-boundary technical and scientific cooperation, and information sharing, and so on. So the list can really be very long as well. In terms of level of implementation, we are looking at member states, including subnational levels, regional, continental, as well as collaboration with UN agencies and international organizations and other partners. And as I said earlier, key activities, as you have seen in the example, are highlighted and presented based on priorities areas. So in terms of role of member state directs, AUC and others, for member state direct, they need to internalize the new matrix and find alignment with current strategies, new or revised strategies, framework, plan, and so forth. And also make sure that we support member states where needed to implement this matrix. AU and UN agencies will need to monitor progress of the implementation through the biennial reporting process and early identification of challenges and address them where needed, and where possible, build capacity of REX and member states to implement the new matrix. And of course, through advocacy, biennial reporting, and so forth. So basically, really, that is the new matrix. And as I said earlier, significant progress was made in the last 4 years, last 5 years. We are hopeful that if we work together, these new ambitions are not actually ambitious, and we can work together to deliver them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Guy. Much appreciated. I'm looking to see if there's any questions or comments from the audience. I don't see any, but just to highlight and reemphasize that this matrix was actually developed after a good analysis of the lessons learned and the experiences that we've had in the past on this. So I think that's a key important area. I also wanted to emphasize also the new areas that you mentioned based on the priorities. What I found interesting is how the priorities now are directly linked to the specific targets of the Sendai framework, as well as the specific targets of the program of action for the implementation of the Sendai frameworks. So that's, I think, is a very good guidance that we will have. And I'm also quite pleased just looking at the sample, not only that it's comprehensive, but it is also an implementation process that is based on a partnership between, the member states, the African Union, and as well as international UN agencies and development partners. So I think that's important, because this is the whole point, to have an all inclusive support to the implementation of disaster risk reduction activities on the continent. I take note also that member states are invited to align this with their own strategies. So it is, a guide, and that it hopefully will complement ongoing efforts at the national level. So I think that's an important point to raise. So thank you very much for that. Let me just double check if there's any further input from the audience. If not, I will go to our next agenda item. Okay. I don't see any questions, and congratulations to the African Union and its partners for really coming up with this very intensive work that's been taken almost since the beginning of the year, if I recall. And so now I'd like to move to our second item, the last one for the day and for the regional platform, is to share with you the draft Nairobi Declaration. I just wanted to say that this is an intensive process and an inclusive consultation process that has led to the development of this declaration, but I'm not going to say too much on that, because I'm going to hand it over to the director of the National Disaster Operations Center, Director and Colonel Mr. Charles Owino. And as some of you may know or be aware, Charles Owino is the chairperson of the drafting committee that's led to this, and they've been spending long nights over the past few days and weeks, to be honest with you, developing this in a fully consultative process. So what we will do is we will post the declaration, the draft declaration, on the screen for all of you to see. And I also, again, encourage that you provide, if you have any interventions, please provide them in the Q&A or the chat box for us to consider. and where appropriate, if you feel comfortable, please provide your name and affiliation when doing so. I would like to now just hand over to Director Charles Awino, and I also ask for the document draft declaration to be put on screen. As I mentioned in the beginning, the French version will also be provided to you on a link on the chat box, so you'll be able to access it and follow it in the French version if you prefer to do that. So let me hand over to Colonel Charles Awino. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, moderator, Mr. Amjad Abashar. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. This draft declaration is a result of consultations, including through the Africa Working Group on Disaster Risk Reduction. Inputs from the African Working Group, regional platform sessions, and voluntary stakeholders' commitments have formed the basis of the declaration. The drafting committee was composed of 34 members representing regional economic communities, the African Union Commission, UN agencies, civil society organizations, youth, women, media, parliamentarians, UN agencies, and other stakeholders. The drafting committee had its in-person meetings from 16th November to today, 18th November 2021, to review and finalize the draft Nairobi Declaration, which I'm going to present now. The drafting committee will further revise the draft declaration based on your inputs and will present it at the high-level meeting tomorrow for consideration and adoption by ministers and heads of delegations in charge of disaster risk reduction. With these few introductory remarks, I'm now presenting the draft declaration for your review. I will go paragraph by paragraph and ask if you have any comments. The Secretariat and other members of the drafting committee will take note of your inputs and comments for consideration in the revised version. The declaration of the 7th high-level meeting on disaster risk reduction, Nairobi, Kenya, 19th November 2021. Please, may I have it larger? Nairobi Declaration on accelerating the path to achieving the goals and targets of the programs of action for the implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-2030 in Africa. May we have it larger, please, Secretariat? We, the ministers and heads of delegations responsible for disaster risk reduction in Africa, having met in Nairobi, Republic of Kenya, on 19th November 2021, on the occasion of the 7th high-level meeting on disaster risk reduction, which was preceded by the 8th Africa Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction, from 16th to 18th November 2021, on the theme, towards disaster risk-informed development for a resilient Africa in a COVID-19 transformed world. Express appreciation to the government and the people of the Republic of Kenya for hosting these events and for the hospitality and warm welcome accorded to the delegates, as well as for providing the opportunity for delegates from across the continent to assess progress and reaffirm commitment to accelerate the implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-2030 and its Africa Program of Action. May we have any views or comments on that, please? Okay, right. Further appreciate the efforts made and the support provided by the African Union Commission, Intergovernmental Authority on Development, and the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction to organize the 8th Africa Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction and the 7th high-level meeting on disaster risk reduction. Further, appreciate member states and regional economic communities for their continued efforts to implement priorities and decisions in the Tunis Declaration and in the Africa Common Position to the 2019 Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction, including the development and implementation of disaster risk reduction policies, strategies, and plans of action in line with the Sendai Framework and its Africa Program of Action, as well as enhancing legal and institutional frameworks and capacities to effectively coordinate, monitor, and review the implementation of the program of action or the implementation of the Sendai Framework in Africa. Recognize with deep concern the continuing negative impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on Africa's social and economic development, including the disproportionate impact on women, and welcome the efforts being made across the continent to respond and to recover from the pandemic. Further, recognize the systemic nature of risk illustrated by interconnected and simultaneous disasters and their cascading and devastating impacts, including loss of lives and livelihoods, damage to infrastructure and displacement, exacerbated by COVID-19, climate change, environmental degradation, and planned and rapid urbanization, poverty, inequality, and conflict, including disproportionate vulnerability and exposure on women and girls, all of which undermine efforts to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. Express deep concern on the growing severity and frequency of climate change-induced disasters and the increasing vulnerabilities of member states, especially small island developing states, to such disasters and the resulting negative effects on their economies and development. Recall the decision of the African Union Executive Council at its 30th ordinary session, January 2017, endorsing the program of action for the implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030 in Africa, that is the program of action, and the Mauritius Declaration on the implementation of the Sendai Framework in Africa. Further, recall the decision of the 3rd ordinary session of the Specialized Technical Committee on Agriculture, Rural Development, Water, and Environment of the African Union, endorsing the Tunis Declaration on accelerating the implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030 and the Africa Regional Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction, and urging the African Union Commission to accelerate the establishment of a continental system for multi-hazard, impact-based, and inclusive early warning preparedness for natural hazards. Value the efforts being made across the continent to advance the disaster risk reduction agenda in the context of the program of action for the implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030 in Africa, while the continent continues to grapple with the COVID-19 crisis. Aware of priorities and decisions in the Tunis Declaration on accelerating the implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030 and the Africa Regional Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction and the Africa Common Position to the 2019 Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction, as well as the Ministerial Declaration on the Specialization of African Ministers of Environment and Natural Resources on the challenges and opportunities presented by the COVID-19 pandemic. That is 13th November 2020. Commend the African Union Commission for its support and leadership in translating the priorities and decisions contained in the Tunis Declaration and in the Africa Common Position to the 2019 Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction, including institutionalization of disaster risk reduction in its regular organizational structure, the development and launch of the biennial report on the program of action for the implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030 in Africa, strengthening capacities for early warning and early action, as well as the establishment and operationalization of the Africa Science and Technology Advisory Group and the Youth Advisory Board on Disaster Risk Reduction. Appreciate the role.
If I might come in, Charles, just to Since this is a interactive session, I'm trying to see if there's a couple of comments.
Yes, please.
So we'll just pause here for a second, and let me just begin with my colleague Kai. I think he just had a useful intervention to make. Please go ahead, sir.
There was reference to climate change, induced disasters. I think we need to make amendments to ensure that we phrase it as climate-related disasters. So I don't remember the exact text, but I think this we need to make some amendments on that section.
Okay, that is noted.
I just wanted to, excuse me. I just wanted to check with our secretariat. There was a comment from Sophie Nyokabi to use the word harmonize program of action. Do you know which paragraph that refers to? Has it been taken? If it's been taken note of, please give me a signal. Yeah, taken note of, Madam Sophie. Thank you. I think you can go ahead, sir.
Thank you, moderator. Appreciate the role of stakeholders, including parliamentarians, the civil society organizations, media, academia, youth, women, private sector, local communities in supporting and implementing the Sendai framework, as well as regional, sub-regional, national, and local disaster risk reduction programs and plans. Further, appreciate the work being carried out by the Africa Working Group on Disaster Risk Reduction in coordinating and guiding the implementation of the Sendai framework and the program of action across the continent. Note the importance of ensuring coherence among global, regional, sub-regional, and national and sub-national disaster risk reduction, climate change, and sustainable development actions, and the need to ensure national development strategies and adaptation plans reflect disaster risk reduction. Stress the important role of regional, sub-regional, national, and sub-national disaster risk reduction platforms and institutions in coherently implementing, monitoring, and reporting progress on the implementation of the Sendai framework and the program of action. Further stress the importance of the Sendai framework and the Africa program of action in providing guidance to sustainable, inclusive, and resilient recovery from disasters, including COVID-19 across the continent, as well as identifying and addressing underlying drivers of disaster risk in a systematic manner. Guys, the role of the African Regional Forum on Sustainable Development and Climate Change and Development in Africa conference in promoting integrated actions for disaster risk reduction and in ensuring risk-informed interventions in implementing Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development and Agenda 2063. Further recognize the partnership between the African Union Commission, Intergovernmental Authority on Development, the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, World Meteorological Organization, and other development partners to launch and operationalize the continental program for the implementation of the Africa Roadmap for improving the availability, access, and use of disaster risk information for early warning and early action, including the context of transboundary risk management. Appreciate the support provided by the governments of Germany, Italy, Norway, Sweden, United Kingdom, the European Union, and the Climate Risk and Early Warning Systems Initiative, as well as other development partners, United Nations agencies, and international and regional financial institutions to implement the Sendai framework and the Africa Program of Action for the implementation of the Sendai framework in Africa in coherence with climate change, sustainable development, and other related actions for resilience. Further appreciate the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction for its continued support in partnership with the African Union Commission in capacity building, including development of tools and guiding documents such as the Sendai Framework Monitor, including the regional module, as well as development, implementation, monitoring, and review of progress of disaster risk reduction strategies and plans at all levels. Welcome the launch of Making Cities Resilient 2030 as a successor of the Making Cities Resilient campaign to facilitate the implementation of the Sendai framework and the program of action at the local level. Acknowledge the support being provided by the United Nations Development Programme and other partners to develop the COVID-19 recovery framework for Africa. Aware of the UN General Assembly Resolution 75/216, can you have it clear? /216 of 21st December 2020 on holding a midterm review of the implementation of the Sendai framework in 2023 to assess progress on integrating disaster risk reduction into policies, programs, and investments at all levels, identify good practice, gaps, and challenges, and accelerate the path to achieving the goal of the Sendai framework and its 7 global targets by 2030. Mindful of the outcome of the COP26 of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change held in Glasgow, United Kingdom, and concerned about the continued insufficient finance for adaptation to climate change, including the increasing severity and frequency of climate change-induced disasters, particularly in Africa and small island developing states. Declare our determination to deliver on our commitments to the implementation of the Sendai framework, the program of action, the Africa Regional Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction, as well as sub-regional and national strategies and plans of action for disaster risk reduction as key instruments for the realization of the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development and Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. And hereby, 1, adopt the matrix of the Program of Action 2021 to 2025 to implement the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030 in Africa. 2, further adopt the Africa Framework for the Multi-Hazard Early Warning Systems and Early Action. 3, call upon member states, regional economic communities, local authorities, the private sector, academia, civil society organizations, development partners, and other stakeholders to support the rollout and implementation of the matrix of the Program of Action 2021 to 2025, as well as the Africa Framework for Multi-Hazard Early Warning Systems and Early Action across the continent. 4, further call upon the United Nations and other international and regional organizations, international and regional financial institutions to consider the matrix of the Program of Action, as well as the Africa Framework for Multi-Hazard Early Warning Systems and Early Action in multilateral and bilateral development assistance programs. 5, request the African Union Commission to continue to regularly prepare the biennial report on the Program of Action for the implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030 in Africa, including to track progress in the implementation of priorities identified in the matrix of the Program of Action. 6, further request member states, regional economic communities, local authorities, the private sector, academia, civil society organizations, development partners, and other stakeholders to support the development and implementation of disaster risk-informed, inclusive, holistic, and gender-sensitive strategies, programs, and plans of action in line with the Sendai Framework and Program of Action at all levels. 7, call for member states to increase the annual national budgetary allocation, as well as to establish innovative financing solutions for the implementation of the gender-sensitive and inclusive disaster risk reduction strategies, programs, and plans of action in coherence with climate change adaptation, biodiversity, conservation, combating desertification, and sustainable development actions, and Great Green Wall Initiative at all levels. 8, further call for the strengthening of resource mobilization strategies and capacities to ensure provision of adequate public and private resources for disaster risk reduction, including COVID-19 response and recovery at all levels. 9, call upon regional economic communities, the African Union Commission, parliamentarians, the private sector, academia, civil society organizations, development partners, and other stakeholders to strengthen the capacity of member states to mainstream disaster risk reduction into planning, budgeting, monitoring, and reporting processes. Reiterate the need for scaling up investments in nature-based solutions for disaster risk reduction, climate action, and supporting sustainable land and biodiversity management, as well as ensuring the early and full implementation of the African Union Green Recovery Action Plan and the Africa Green Stimulus Program as key instruments for building resilience. 11, call upon development partners, including bilateral and multilateral development agencies and financial institutions and mechanisms to significantly scale up financial, technological, and capacity building support for the implementation of gender-sensitive and inclusive disaster risk reduction strategies, programs, and plans of action in coherence with climate change adaptation and sustainable development actions, and with consideration of laws and damage associated with climate change at all levels. 12, reiterate the need to member states to ensure stronger partnerships between institutions responsible for disaster risk reduction, environmental management, climate change action, planning and finance, and other sectors to ensure a coherent, integrated, and a whole of society approach to disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation at all levels. 13, urge regional economic communities, the African Union Commission, the private sector, academia, civil society organizations, development partners, and other stakeholders to strengthen the capacity of member states to better prepare for, respond to, and recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, while continuing efforts to deal with other hazards and their cascading effects. 14, further urge regional economic communities, the African Union Commission, the private sector, academia, civil society organizations, development partners, and other stakeholders to consider disaster risk reduction in the overall COVID-19 response and recovery plans and mechanisms for resilience. 15, request member states, regional economic communities, the African Union Commission, the private sector, and development partners to strengthen financial and technical support to use the existing Sendai Framework Monitor system for monitoring and reporting on progress in achieving all targets of the Sendai Framework and the Program of Action. 16, further request member states, regional economic communities, the African Union Commission, the private sector, development partners, and other stakeholders to enhance capacities to understand the disaster risks, the multiple and compounding hazards, the changing exposure and the multidimensional vulnerability of the populations. 17, urge member states to ensure please let us see it clearly. Urge member states to ensure the development and use of multi-hazard and multi-sector risk assessments, collection and analysis of disaster loss data, disaggregated, where relevant, by income, age, gender, disability, and the geographical location, as well as putting in place a mechanism for the exchange of disaster-related data between institutions responsible for disaster risk reduction and management and other relevant sectors. 18, call upon the African Union Commission, the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, and other partners to support the integration of disaster risk reduction and the Sendai Framework Monitor into the African peer review mechanism processes, methodology, and questionnaire to facilitate the assessment of member states' resilience, including the commitment to avail experts, as well as strengthen their capacities and mechanisms to effectively prepare for, respond to and recover from disasters, including COVID-19. Encourage member states to ensure the development and implementation of the United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation frameworks that are risk-informed and aligned to the national development plans to support their efforts to achieve sustainable development goals and the goals of Agenda 2063. 20, further encourage the adoption of a whole of society approach that integrates women, children and youth, local communities, the elderly, people living with disabilities, displaced people, and other people in vulnerable situations, as well as consider indigenous and local knowledge systems and practices, age and cultural perspectives into the design and implementation of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation strategies and plans. 21, commit to advocate for and support strong risk governance systems supported by regulatory and legal frameworks to buttress the implementation of the Sendai framework and the Africa Program of Action at all levels. 22, urge member states and regional economic communities to unlock risk-informed investments by generating and institutionalizing economic decision support tools such as cost-benefit analysis and risk assessments to generate the evidence needed to enable the development of holistic and actionable strategies and prioritize investments for disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and sustainable development. 23, further urge member states and regional economic communities to actively participate in and follow up on the outcomes of the Africa Regional Forum on Sustainable Development and Climate Change and Development in Africa conference to strengthen the integration of disaster risk reduction, climate change, and sustainable development actions, as well as consideration of disaster risk reduction in voluntary national reviews and sub-national voluntary reviews. 24, call upon member states, regional economic communities, the African Union Commission, the private sector, academia, civil society organizations, development partners, and other stakeholders to strengthen continental, regional, and national capacities for multi-hazard based early warning systems for early action and for effective transboundary risk management. 5, further call upon the African Union Commission, United Nations organizations, especially the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, World Meteorological Organization, and United Nations Development Program, and other development partners to continue to strengthen their support to member states and regional economic communities through the provision of guidance, tools, and technical assistance, and by facilitating the exchange of experiences, including for the strengthening of the multi-hazard and impact-based early warning systems for early action and for effective transboundary risk management. 26, urge member states, regional economic communities, regional climate centers, the African Union Commission, the private sector academia, civil society organizations, development partners, and other stakeholders to strengthen hydrological and meteorological systems and improve weather and climate information generation and outreach with the involvement of volunteers, and through enhancing risk awareness and tailoring messages and information to specific end users for effective early warning and early action and transboundary risk management at all levels. 27, call upon member states, regional economic communities, and the African Union Commission to consider disaster-induced displacement in regional, sub-regional, national, and local levels and integrate disaster risk reduction, climate change, and development strategies and plans to reduce and prevent the risk of disaster displacement, and thus build the resilience of displaced people and host communities. 28, further call upon member states, non-state actors, and other stakeholders to actively participate in and contribute through inclusive and evidence-based processes to the midterm review of the implementation of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030 in Africa. 29. Request member states, regional economic communities, the African Union Commission, and development partners to strengthen support to the African Science and Technology Advisory Group, as well as the Youth Advisory Board on Disaster Risk Reduction as key instruments contributing to the realization of the outcomes of the Sendai Framework and the Program of Action. 30. Encourage member states to actively support and participate in the African Risk Capacity's innovative risk pooling mechanism to fully leverage the benefits of this and other diverse risk financing tools. 31. Call upon United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction and other United Nations organizations and development partners to strengthen partnerships and cooperation through enhancing regional, sub-regional, and national coordination mechanisms, as well as North-South, South-South, and triangular cooperation in support of the implementation of the Sendai Framework and the Program of Action at all levels. 32. Request the African Union Commission to accelerate the development of the COVID-19 Recovery Framework for Africa to be submitted for consideration and adoption by the 4th Ordinary Session of the Specialized Technical Committee on Agriculture, Rural Development, Water, and Environment. 33. Mandate the Africa Working Group on Disaster Risk Reduction to coordinate the development of the Africa position to the 2022 Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction and ensure that these processes are inclusive, participatory, and member states driven. 34. Request the government of the Republic of Kenya as the chair of the 8th Africa Regional Platform and the 7th High-Level Meeting on Disaster Risk Reduction to submit the Nairobi Declaration to the African Union Policy Organ for endorsement and advocate for the follow-up and implementation of this declaration in other forums. Done on this day, the 19th of November, 2021 in Nairobi. That is the end of the Nairobi Declaration.
Thank you very much, Director, for the presentation. And I think I see heads nodding. We have minor inputs so far, and but I just want to assure that particularly Mr. Arnold Ambundu in the audience, who requested the inclusion of reference to migrants on paragraph 20, and that has been taken account of. As I'm speaking, if there are any objections, do flag them very, very quickly. I'm just, as I conclude, and I'll look to see if there's any input that's coming in. But I must, in the meantime, I want to congratulate Director Charles Owino and his team for excellent, comprehensive, what I think is an excellent and comprehensive document that I think not only identifies the priorities, but also the concrete actions that we have to take as partners to this document to take it forward. I was very impressed with the comprehensive nature of the document. It ranges from issues related to early warning to disaster financing, the importance of inclusivity, coherence between climate risk and disaster risk reduction, and the issue of partnerships, and also reaffirming the role of the REX and the African Union and member states in terms of having to lead the disaster risk reduction agenda in our continent. I have to also say, extend through you, Director, my thanks and thanks on behalf of my organization, actually, to the whole team. And I know you had a multi-stakeholder team of almost 35 people, and it increased with member states in the last 2 nights. And I think I went in, I saw the work in the room, and it was extensive, well thought out, and thorough discussions that I believe led to this wonderful document that my organization will adhere to once it is finally formally endorsed by the ministers. And I wanted to also just state that I encourage actually all the participants who are with you, in particularly the member states, to ensure that their ministers and their heads of delegations are well briefed on the contents of this document, and to ensure that we have a smooth discussion tomorrow at the high level, ministerial level tomorrow on this document. So it's very important that we do not go back to whatever discourse or debate that was happening during the sessions of the drafting committee. And this has been, a certain a good pleasure for me to actually work with you on this. I'm going to ask the African Union to say a few words before I finally hand over to you, Director. In the meantime, I will be looking at the chat to see if there's any additional comments. But again, reiterate my warm congratulations and my warm thanks to the incredible dedication that was provided by the members of the drafting committee, the RECs, the agencies, and of course, the member states and all the stakeholders there. So let me hand over to my colleague, Kai, who might want to say a few words in closing before I hand over to the director. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Amjad. I just also want to join you to congratulate Colonel Charles for the excellent leadership in the drafting of this important declaration. I would say really this is very comprehensive, and I think a lot of the contemporary realities in disaster risk management on the continent are all contained in this declaration. And this is not coincident, knowing Colonel Charles has been a resident contributor in the DRR space, right from Oyugo to Sendai. And I think having him as a leader of this declaration have had a significant advantage to the document. Just to ensure that it's not really a significant comment on the document, but I would like to see if this document could be further reduced to make it more easier for ministers to capture some of the important key messages. When I went through it, I think there are references to financing in a number of articles, perhaps like 5 articles making reference to financing. If we could combine them to one article, I think that would be much appreciated, and that can reduce significantly the size of the document. Also, a number of references were made to early warning systems several times. We may look into those articles and make sure that the spirit of those articles are captured in one article. I think that will really make the document quite easier. Maybe it can reduce further to below 9 pages. I think the preamble is quite comprehensive and very long. I don't know whether it can be possible to reduce it to 1 page. Yeah, it's quite long. It's almost the same pages with the actual declaration. So if we could make some gain in the preambles, I think that will make this document more precise. But overall, I just want to say thank you all for all the excellent work. Our team, we have been working on this drafting, and all of you, and I know this includes my colleague in the RECs, member states, civil society, and my team members who have been part of this drafting, and we have worked tirelessly to ensure that this is capturing the challenges and opportunities that we have at the moment. One last comment is that having a declaration is quite easy, but implementing a declaration is not that easy as drafting it. And we need to be very careful to put in statements that will not be able to achieve in the next 2 years before the next ministerial declaration. we when we look through Tunis declaration, we are quite happy that we made significant progress, but there are some statements that cannot be implemented. So I think learning from previous declaration, we don't need to produce documents that will collect dust on our desk. We need to produce documents that are living and that we can implement within a shorter time frame possible. But otherwise, thank you very much for the excellent work. Back to you, Amjad.
Thank you very much, Guy. Let me now hand over to Director for your any feedback or comments and closing remarks.
Thank you very much, moderator. I would like to thank you, moderator, and Mr. Gatkuthkai for your comments, which are actually very good and instructive. I'm sure they will make us think twice on some of the things that we have written, so as to make the document better. For example, if I can just paraphrase what or comment on what Mr. Kai has talked of. The preamble is a bit long. We'll see what can be done about it. The operative part, as you've mentioned, has articles that talk on the same issue. For example, the finance part and the early warning. And you've requested us to see whether we could reduce it to below 9 pages. These are issues that the drafting committee will look into and see what you can do about it. But otherwise, I think we are learning, and we appreciate the comments that have been given in respect of the work that we have done. Otherwise, I really don't have much to add now. Just to say that thank you very much for listening to us, and we'll get to work on the issues that we mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director, and thank you all the team that you've been working with. And I want to give special thanks to my colleague Mateo Stulo. I have to single him out because he was. I know how many hours he spent behind this and so many negotiations in preparing the zero draft until this. Until supporting you and your team, Director, as well as African Union and Rex and the other drafting committee members, member states included, to actually come up with this document. I take note of the comment from the African Union, and I don't think they're very difficult. It's just a matter of compressing some of the paragraphs, since to avoid duplication or repetition. Other than that, I just want to reiterate again my thanks to all the team who's working behind this, and I want to thank all of you. Right now, I have not seen any further input coming from the Q&A box from the colleagues, so I think that means that substantively speaking, and in terms of content, not necessarily the length, but in terms of content, it seems that it has no political or substantive objections from the floor. So with that, I would like to end this session and invite you all, those who are able to participate, who are signed up to participate with their ministers in tomorrow's event, either virtually or in hybrid format. So I thank you all very much again, and enjoy the rest of our afternoon and the rest of the evening. All the best and goodbye.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of today's session. and the virtual aspects of the 8th Africa Regional Platform on Disaster Risk Reduction. Today's sessions have touched on critical issues that are key to achieving a resilient Africa. These include, but not limited to, strengthened governance of multiple hazards and COVID-19, acquiring data that is useful and relevant for DRR, improved understanding and comprehensive disaster risk reduction and management to ensure that no one is left behind. Equally key were discussions on different financing instruments to address the different phases of disaster risk management and the formation of strategic partnerships to have far-reaching impact on DRR on the continent. Tomorrow will be the high-level ministerial session, which will bring together ministers for disaster risk reduction and member states, heads of delegation, who will consider and adopt the regional platform outcomes. The session will be a hybrid event and attendance will be by invitation only. Thank you for your participation today and hope to see you tomorrow.